1. The ship of Theseus.
Paradox. If you replace every part of a ship, is it still the same ship? Let's begin with a quiet harbor. Imagine a majestic wooden ship, the ship of Theseus, gliding gently across calm waters. Over the years, one by one, its parts begin to wear out. The planks, the mast, the sails, all replaced piece by piece until no original material remains. Now pause. You look at the fully restored ship, still bearing the same name, the same legacy, but not a single original component. Is it still the same ship? This is the heart of the ship of Theseus paradox, a centuries-old philosophical puzzle about identity and continuity. It asks us, what truly defines something? Is it the material it's made of? Or is it the pattern, the shape, the history, the idea? Take it further. Imagine someone collected all the discarded original parts, reassembled them into a new ship. Which one is the real ship of Theseus now? The one with continuity of function, or the one with original parts? This paradox isn't just about boats. It's about you. If every cell in your body is replaced over time, are you the same person? What about memories, beliefs, behaviors? It's a gentle nudge reminding us that identity, personal, social, even spiritual, may not be fixed. It flows, shifts, evolves. And maybe that's not a flaw. Maybe it's what makes you, you.
2. The Bootstrap Paradox. Can something exist without ever being created? Picture this. A scientist in the future builds a time machine. One day they receive a mysterious blueprint, instructions for a device. They build it, only to realize it's the time machine itself. Years later, they travel back in time and hand the blueprint to their younger self. Where did the blueprint come from? This is the Bootstrap Paradox, a causal loop where an object or information exists without ever being created. It loops endlessly with no beginning, no origin, a blueprint with no author, a song with no composer, a book with no writer. Science fiction loves this idea. A man gives Shakespeare a copy of Hamlet. Shakespeare publishes it. Centuries later, someone time travels and gives Hamlet back to its original author. But who actually wrote it? It's not just a puzzle, it's a fracture in how we understand cause and effect. We're taught that every effect has a cause, that time flows forward. But what if time bends? What if causality can be circular? It forces us to question reality, not just how time works, but how knowledge, creativity, and even destiny might be entangled in loops we don't see. And as you drift into rest, imagine the impossible simplicity of something that exists because it always did, a gift from nowhere, an idea without birth. 3. The paradox of the unexpected hanging. If a surprise is guaranteed, can it still be a surprise? You're a prisoner. The judge tells you, you will be hanged next week on a weekday, but the execution will be a surprise. You won't know the day until the morning it happens. You think, it can't be Friday. If I'm not hanged by Thursday night, Friday is the only day left. I'd expect it, so it can't be Friday. Then you eliminate Thursday. If Friday is ruled out and you make it to Wednesday night unhanged, Thursday would be the only option, not a surprise. You go on, eliminating Wednesday, then Tuesday, and finally even Monday. By your logic, the hanging cannot happen at all. Then, Wednesday morning comes. You're startled awake. The guards arrive. You're completely shocked. The hanging was unexpected, and yet exactly what was promised. This is the unexpected hanging paradox. It's a riddle about logic, knowledge, and self-reference. It shows how even flawless reasoning can fail, because the premise itself resists prediction. It's logic turned inward, a mirror that fractures what it reflects. The deeper lesson: our minds crave certainty, but some truths, like surprises, like the future, aren't puzzles to be solved. They are experiences to be lived. And perhaps not knowing is exactly what makes life so vivid, so unexpected, and so deeply real. 5. The Raven Paradox. Can a green apple prove that all ravens are black? Let's begin with a quiet observation. All ravens are black. Now imagine a scientist trying to prove this. They observe raven after raven, and all of them are indeed black. So far, so good. But here's where it gets strange. Logically, the statement all ravens are black is equivalent to all non-black things are not ravens. So if you observe a green apple, a non-black object that is not a raven, you've technically found supporting evidence that all ravens are black. But that feels wrong, doesn't it? How can a green apple possibly tell us anything meaningful about the color of ravens? This is the Raven Paradox, and it challenges the very nature of evidence and confirmation. It shows us that logic and intuition don't always align, that truth in theory doesn't always feel like truth in reality. It's a soft contradiction, not one that breaks reason, but one that bends it, and it asks us to examine how we truly know what we claim to know. As you listen, let the image of the green apple and the black raven dance in your mind. Two opposites, equally valid, quietly complicating what it means to know. 6. The Lottery Paradox. What happens when you believe something reasonable and still end up wrong? Picture yourself buying a ticket in a massive lottery. Millions of tickets are sold, but only one will win. Now, for any single ticket, it's reasonable to believe it won't win. The odds are stacked against it. It's the rational conclusion. So you look at each ticket and say, that one won't win, and that one won't either, and that one too. Eventually, you believe, quite reasonably, that none of the tickets will win. But of course, one of them will. This is the lottery paradox, and it exposes a quiet flaw in our thinking, that you can make individually rational judgments that collectively lead to a contradiction. It's a tension between probability and certainty, between what's reasonable and what's actually true. It invites us to question the limits of belief, and whether being reasonable is always the same as being right. The paradox echoes in other parts of life too, judging people by statistics, assuming outcomes based on averages, or dismissing rare possibilities. It gently reminds us that logic can mislead, and reason, while powerful, is not infallible. Sometimes believing in the improbable is the only path to truth. 7. The Zeno's paradoxes, Achilles and the tortoise. Can the fastest runner ever catch the slowest? Picture a race between Achilles, the swift hero of Greek legend, and a humble tortoise. To make it fair, the tortoise is given a head start. Achilles, confident in his speed, begins running. But here's the catch. By the time Achilles reaches the point where the tortoise started, the tortoise has moved a bit farther. Achilles closes that gap, but again, the tortoise has advanced slightly. This continues endlessly. Every time Achilles reaches where the tortoise was, the tortoise has moved forward. So, according to this logic, Achilles can never overtake the tortoise. He's trapped in an infinite series of steps. No matter how small the gap becomes, there's always more to close. This is Zeno's paradox, and it challenges our basic understanding of motion and infinity. How can an infinite number of steps add up to a finite distance? Of course, Achilles does overtake the tortoise. We know that. But the paradox lies not in physics, but in the language of logic, in how we model reality. It's a reminder that infinite processes can be deeply misleading, especially when measured one fragment at a time. As you drift, let this paradox stretch time a little. Let the race slow down, step by step, and feel how even in motion, stillness can be found. 8. The Omnipotence Paradox. Can an all-powerful being create a stone so heavy that it cannot lift it? It's a simple question, and yet It's one that philosophers and theologians have debated for centuries. If the being can create such a stone, then there exists something it cannot do: lift it. But if it cannot create such a stone, then there's still something it cannot do: create it. Either way, there's a limit. This is the Omnipotence Paradox, a contradiction wrapped in the very idea of limitless power. It forces us to examine the boundaries of infinity and whether concepts like all-powerful even make sense under scrutiny. Perhaps omnipotence isn't about doing the logically impossible. Maybe it's not about bending logic to its will, but about existing within the rules it creates. This paradox doesn't just probe theology, it also whispers about control, agency, and perfection. That even the most powerful ideas contain fragile cracks when we examine them too closely. It's a gentle invitation to release the need for absolute answers and to sit peacefully in the mystery of impossibility. 9. The Preface Paradox. What if you believe everything you've written, but also believe some of it is wrong? Imagine you're an author. You've written a long, thoughtful book, carefully researched, thoroughly argued. You believe in every statement you've made. But in the preface, you humbly add, some parts of this book are likely to be incorrect. It's a reasonable admission. No one is infallible. But now a strange contradiction emerges. You believe each individual claim in the book, yet you also believe some of them are false. Can both beliefs be true? This is the Preface Paradox, and it speaks to the tension between certainty in the parts and uncertainty in the whole. It reflects a deeper human experience, where we live with confidence in our ideas, while still knowing we could be wrong. We trust our judgment, but we also expect imperfection. Rather than a flaw, this paradox may be a kind of wisdom, an embrace of complexity, a quiet acknowledgement that belief doesn't always require absolute certainty. In a way, this paradox teaches humility, the kind that lets you keep writing, keep thinking, and keep growing, even when you know you might be wrong. 10. The Sorites Paradox. How many grains of sand make a heap? Imagine a single grain of sand. It's clearly not a heap. Add another, still not a heap. Add one more, and then another, and another. At what exact point does it become a heap? This is the Sorites Paradox, a soft contradiction that arises from vague definitions. If removing one grain from a heap doesn't stop it from being a heap, then by that logic, even a single grain could still be considered one. But clearly it isn't. This paradox reveals the fragility of boundaries, the way our concepts depend on arbitrary lines that fade when examined closely. It applies not just to sand, but to life. At what point does youth become age? When does a crowd become a mob? When does wealth become poverty? We build our world with blurry edges, and yet treat them as precise. The Sorites Paradox gently peels back those assumptions and shows us some truths are not binary. They emerge in the gray spaces in between. 11. The Paradox of the Court. Crocodile Paradox. If you only pay your lawyer when you win, but the case is about not paying your lawyer, who wins? Picture ancient Athens. A young man named Euathlus agrees to study law under the philosopher Protagoras. The deal is simple. Euathlus will pay for his education only after he wins his first court case. Time passes. He finishes his studies, but never takes a case. Protagoras, feeling cheated, sues him. And here's the twist. Protagoras argues, if I win, the court will order you to pay me. If you win, you've won your first case. So by our contract, you still owe me. But Euathlus responds, if I lose, I haven't won my first case, so I owe you nothing. If I win, the court says I don't have to pay. Either way, I don't owe you. Both seem to have airtight logic, and yet they can't both be right. This is the paradox of the court, a legal riddle that questions the very idea of justice, obligation, and circular reasoning. It's not just a clever puzzle. It reflects real-world situations where truth and fairness can diverge, where intention and outcome become hopelessly tangled. Sometimes the law creates knots it cannot untie, and in that tension lies the paradox. 12. The paradox of tolerance. Can a tolerant society tolerate intolerance without destroying itself? Imagine a society built on openness. Everyone is free to believe, speak, and live as they choose. But then, an ideology appears, one that hates this very openness. It spreads intolerance, demands suppression, and seeks control. Should the tolerant society allow it? This is the paradox of tolerance, introduced by philosopher Karl Popper. It reveals a dangerous contradiction. If you tolerate everything, including intolerance, you risk being destroyed by it. But if you choose not to tolerate intolerance, have you betrayed your own ideals? It's a moral trap, a balance between principle and protection, freedom and defense. The paradox teaches that true tolerance requires limits, not to silence opposition, but to preserve the fragile framework that allows diverse voices to coexist. It's a warning, but also a guide. That standing for tolerance sometimes means standing firm, not against difference, but against those who seek to erase it. 13. The Crocodile Paradox. Can a promise be broken by a promise? Let's step into a quiet world where the air is still and your heart beats steadily, yet your mind is caught in a logical trap. Imagine this. Your child has been taken by a crocodile, and you stand at the edge of a calm river. The crocodile looks at you with its cold, unblinking eyes and says, "I will return your child if, and only if, you can correctly guess what I will do next." At this moment, everything freezes. It's not just about your child's fate anymore. This is a paradox that has puzzled philosophers for centuries. It's a puzzle about logic, about knowledge, and about the certainty of truth. If you predict that the crocodile will return your child, the only way to be correct is if it does. But what if the crocodile refuses to do so? If you predict that it won't return your child, you set the stage for a logical contradiction. If your prediction is right, it forces the crocodile to do what it swore not to. And yet, the paradox only deepens. This paradox is about more than just a crocodile. It's a question of promises, trust, and control. It shows how systems and structures can be manipulated, and how we often find ourselves trapped by the rules of the very system we're in. What can we learn? Maybe not every problem can be solved by logic. Sometimes recognizing the paradox itself is the key. 14. The Preface Paradox. What if you believe everything you've written, but also believe some of it is wrong? Imagine you are an author. You've written a thoughtful and carefully researched book filled with your best ideas and arguments. As you approach the preface, you include a small, humble note. Some parts of this book are likely to be incorrect. On one hand, you truly believe in every individual claim within the book. But on the other hand, you've acknowledged that, as with all knowledge, some parts might be wrong. Now, here's the paradox. You believe each individual statement in the book, yet you also believe that some of those statements are false. Can both beliefs coexist? The Preface Paradox challenges the tension between certainty and uncertainty. It reflects the experience of living with confidence in your ideas, while also knowing that, as a human, you're fallible. It teaches us that certainty isn't the same as perfection, and sometimes wisdom lies in knowing that we can be wrong even when we are certain. It's a quiet reminder that we can grow and adapt even in the face of our own limitations. 15. The Paradox of the Unexpected Choice. How can you make a choice if it is predetermined? Imagine you're standing at a crossroads. There are two paths ahead of you. One path leads to a peaceful garden, the other to a dark, tangled forest. You feel a sense of calm, knowing that the choice is entirely up to you. The decision is yours to make, and the path you take will shape the journey ahead. But here's the twist. What if you knew that no matter how much you felt in control, the choice had already been made for you? The paradox of the unexpected choice reveals the tension between free will and determinism. It challenges the idea that we can ever truly make a choice. Because if our future is already set, can anything we decide truly be our decision? It's a quiet reminder of the uncertainty in every moment. Perhaps it's not about fully understanding our control over our decisions, but rather accepting that sometimes the act of choosing is what matters most. 16. The paradox of free will. Are we free, or is everything predestined? Let's explore the question of free will. You wake up in the morning, stretch, and decide to go for a walk. You feel the cool morning air, hear the birds chirping, and know that the day lies open before you. You believe you're making choices. But are you? If everything in the universe is governed by laws, from physics to biology to the patterns in our brains, then is your decision really your own? Or is it a product of causes you can't control? The paradox of free will sits at the crossroads of determinism and liberty. It's the tension between the idea that we are free agents, capable of choosing our path, and the belief that all our actions are ultimately determined by factors beyond our control. This paradox doesn't have a clear answer. Instead, it forces us to reflect on the nature of choice, responsibility, and control. Do we choose freely, or are we just following the script of a larger, invisible plan? Perhaps the greatest lesson here is the invitation to be present in the moment. Whether we have full freedom or not, the experience of choosing, the act itself, can be meaningful. Even in the uncertainty of free will, we are still living and engaging with the world around us. 17. The paradox of the unexpected coincidence. How can two events be a coincidence when they seem so perfectly aligned? Imagine this. You're walking down the street, lost in thought, when suddenly you run into an old friend. You haven't seen them in years, and yet here they are at the exact moment you pass by. It seems like fate, like some cosmic alignment. But then you think, is this just a coincidence? What does it mean for two things to align so perfectly? When we experience a coincidence like this, we feel as though the universe is speaking to us, offering some hidden message. But the paradox of the unexpected coincidence suggests that coincidences, while seemingly meaningful, might just be random. Are we seeing patterns where none truly exist? It reminds us that we may find meaning in things that are simply a product of chance. Perhaps the beauty of a coincidence is not in its explanation, but in the wonder it sparks within us. 18. The paradox of the infinite hotel. Can you have an infinite number of guests in an infinitely large hotel? Picture a hotel with infinitely many rooms, all occupied. This is Hilbert's Hotel, a place where no room is empty, but there's still always room for more. Now imagine that a new guest arrives. At first it seems impossible, every room is filled. But the hotel manager, with a smile, moves each guest from room N to room N+1, making room in room 1. With this clever arrangement, the hotel is able to accommodate an infinite number of new guests, even though it was already full. This paradox challenges our understanding of infinity. How can an infinite space already filled still accommodate an infinite number of additional guests? It speaks to the peculiar and often counterintuitive nature of infinity itself, where even seemingly impossible things are possible. It invites us to contemplate the infinite potential within the universe. A reminder that some concepts defy the limitations of our understanding. 19. The paradox of the self-defeating prophecy. Can you change the future by predicting it? Imagine that you receive a prophecy. You will fail. You hear these words clearly, and you believe them. As you go through your life, you act in ways that avoid failure, trying to change the prophecy. But by believing in it and trying to avoid it, do you inadvertently cause it to come true? This is the self-defeating prophecy, a paradox where the prediction about the future forces you to act in ways that ensure it happens. By trying to avoid the prophecy, you bring it closer. The paradox forces us to reflect on how our beliefs about the future shape our present actions. Can the very act of trying to prevent something cause it to happen? It's a gentle reminder that the future is often shaped by the way we approach it, and sometimes the best way to avoid failure is to let go of the fear of it. 20. The paradox of the arrow. Can an arrow ever reach its destination if it's always halfway there? Imagine an arrow in flight. As it leaves the bowstring, it travels toward its target. But here's the twist. Every time the arrow moves, it only reaches halfway to its destination. First, it travels half the distance. Then, it covers half of the remaining distance. And so on, with each step having the remaining space. According to this logic, the arrow will never reach its target, because there's always another half to cover. This is Zeno's arrow paradox, which challenges our understanding of motion and time. If we think of time as a series of smaller steps, can we ever truly reach the end? This paradox asks us to reflect on the nature of progress, not just in physical terms, but in our personal lives as well. Are we always moving toward something, or are we simply navigating endless steps, each only halfway to the next? Perhaps the answer lies in understanding that while motion can be divided infinitely, the journey itself is just as important as the destination. 21. The paradox of the twin paradox. Can two people be in different places at the same time, yet experience time differently? Let's imagine two identical twins. One stays on Earth, and the other travels to a distant star at nearly the speed of light. When the twin returns, they find that the twin who stayed on Earth has aged much more than they have. Time for the traveling twin has passed more slowly. This is the twin paradox, and it arises from Einstein's theory of relativity. The faster you travel, the slower time passes for you compared to someone who is stationary. The paradox challenges our understanding of time as a constant flow. If time is relative, how can we measure our own place within it? This paradox invites us to ponder the mysteries of space and time, and how our perceptions of them can shift depending on where we stand, or, in this case, how fast we move. 22. The paradox of the Sorites, paradox of the heap. At what point does a pile of sand stop being a heap? Picture a heap of sand, a large pile, gathered over time. Now, imagine you remove a single grain of sand. Does it stop being a heap? No, the heap is still there. So you remove another grain, and another. Slowly the pile shrinks, but it's still a heap. At what point does it stop being a heap? When you remove the last grain? Or is it the gradual nature of change that makes it impossible to pinpoint the exact moment when the heap ceases to exist? This is the paradox of the Sorites, and it raises questions about when something changes and how we categorize things. Can something change gradually until it no longer fits its original definition? It's a paradox that reflects the challenges of language and reasoning. It forces us to confront the limits of our concepts and the gray areas that often go unnoticed in our daily lives. The Sorites Paradox teaches us that sometimes understanding the boundaries of a concept isn't as clear-cut as it seems. In life, as in logic, things may change slowly, and the transition might be impossible to define with certainty. 23. The paradox of the Cretan liar. Can a statement be both true and false at the same time? Imagine a Cretan philosopher standing before you and proclaiming, "All Cretans are liars." At first glance, it seems simple enough, but here's the twist. If the philosopher is indeed a Cretan and they're telling the truth, then it would mean that all Cretans are liars, including themselves. But if they're lying, then their statement is false, and not all Cretans are liars. This creates a logical loop where the statement cannot be purely true or false. This is the Cretan liar paradox, a self-referential puzzle that reveals the complexity of language and truth. It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. How can a statement both validate and invalidate itself? It reminds us that some truths might be too complex to neatly categorize, and sometimes our attempts to define them only create more confusion. 24. The paradox of the tortoise and Achilles revisited. Can the fastest person ever overtake the slowest? Imagine once again a race between the swift Achilles and the slow tortoise, only this time the tortoise is given a head start. But this time the tortoise gets even more clever. It sets a new challenge. Achilles must pass the tortoise before reaching the halfway mark. But once he reaches that point, the tortoise moves slightly further ahead, and then the process repeats. Each time Achilles reaches where the tortoise once was, the tortoise is already a little further down the path. According to the logic of Zeno's paradox, Achilles will never pass the tortoise, no matter how fast he runs. This paradox isn't really about Achilles or the tortoise. It's about how we understand motion, time, and distance. It reminds us that when we break things down into ever smaller parts, we may lose sight of the bigger picture. It asks us to reflect on the infinite nature of our own goals, and how they can sometimes seem endlessly distant, even when we're closer than we think. 25. The paradox of the two envelopes. Can you ever truly know which envelope is better? Imagine you're presented with two envelopes. One contains a sum of money, and you're told that the other envelope contains either double or half the amount. You pick one envelope, and now you're faced with a dilemma. Should you switch envelopes? On the surface, it seems like you should always switch. If the envelope you've chosen contains a sum of money, then the other envelope could either have twice that amount or half. But you can never be sure which one contains the larger sum. This leads to a paradox. No matter which envelope you choose, there's a seemingly rational reason to switch. But by continuously switching, you never seem to improve your situation. The paradox of the two envelopes exposes the limitations of our decision-making when we don't have enough information. It shows how we can get caught in cycles of uncertainty, trying to predict the best option when we can never truly know. It invites us to think about how we approach choices in life. Sometimes, the best choice is simply the one we've already made. 26. The paradox of the falsehood. Can a statement be both true and false at once? Let's consider a statement like this. This statement is false. Now pause and reflect. If the statement is true, then it must be false, but if it is false, then it must be true. This is the liar paradox, a classic puzzle that defies simple logic. It's a statement that cannot be true or false because by declaring itself true, it undoes its own truth. This paradox invites us to think about how language can be both self-defining and self-undermining. It shows that even the most straightforward expressions can be filled with contradictions that twist and turn back upon themselves. It reminds us of the limits of certainty in communication and the complexity of truth in our own understanding of reality. 27. The paradox of the shipwrecked sailor. Can you be both lost and found at the same time? Imagine a sailor stranded on a desert island after a shipwreck. The sailor's world is reduced to the small, lonely island and the vast, uncharted ocean around them. They feel completely lost, disconnected from everything they knew. But then, Something strange happens. The sailor begins to build a life on the island, finding resources, making tools, and learning to survive. Over time, the island that once seemed like a prison becomes a place of comfort and self-reliance. Now, the sailor is lost and found, lost in the sense of being far from civilization, but found in the sense of discovering strength and resilience within themselves. This paradox invites us to reflect on how situations can simultaneously be both negative and positive, depending on our perspective. Sometimes we are lost in one way, but found in another. It teaches us that the meaning of being lost isn't always what it seems, and that there is value even in challenging, uncertain experiences. 28. The paradox of the truth-teller and the liar. Can someone who always tells the truth ever lie? Imagine a person who has never told a lie in their life, a perfect truth-teller. One day, this person says, "I will tell a lie now." If the person is telling the truth, then their statement is a lie, which creates a contradiction. But if the person is lying, then their statement must be true, because they said they would lie. This paradox challenges our understanding of truth and honesty. Can someone who only speaks truth ever make a statement that is both true and false at the same time? The paradox pushes us to examine how absolute ideas like truth and falsehood can be tangled when examined closely. It asks us whether purity in one form, truth, for example, can ever exist without exception or contradiction. 29. The paradox of the paradox of analysis. Can a definition ever be perfect? Consider a simple question. What is a triangle? We could define it as a shape with three sides. But then we ask, does this definition capture the full essence of a triangle? For any definition we offer, there is always the possibility of it being incomplete. The definition may not perfectly encompass every possible form of a triangle, or it may be too broad to be useful in all contexts. This is known as the paradox of analysis. It tells us that every time we define something, we must leave out certain aspects of it, even though we might want a perfect, all-encompassing definition. Can we ever define a concept in a way that doesn't miss something important? This paradox forces us to confront the limits of language and understanding. It invites us to reflect on the process of trying to define and categorize everything in our lives. Sometimes definitions are imperfect, but in their imperfection, they may still help us navigate the world. 30. The paradox of the self-reference. Can you truly understand yourself? Imagine you're sitting in a quiet room, thinking about who you are. You reflect on your life, your experiences, your beliefs, and your feelings. You try to understand yourself as fully as possible. But here's the paradox. In trying to understand yourself, you're always a step removed. You are the one doing the understanding, yet how can you truly know the one who is doing the knowing? This is the paradox of self-reference, a philosophical puzzle that asks if it's possible to fully understand your own mind. The more you attempt to observe and reflect, the more you distance yourself from the pure, unmediated experience of being. It reminds us that some parts of ourselves are always beyond our grasp, no matter how deeply we explore. Self-awareness may be an endless pursuit, but perhaps the beauty lies in the journey of seeking understanding rather than in the certainty of the answers.